So welcome back. As you saw last time, what I did was only take about 15 or 20 minutes from the 1 hour. There was just so much there. There's so much that people really want to view at one time. So I don't know. We could talk about anything, but one of the things that really interested me in your in your talks is the idea that we're inherent storytellers. And I sent a note out this morning, in some ways challenging that notion that I think that we make stories in our brains. We're constantly putting things together in some sort of narrative order. I don't know how good we all are at telling stories. And I pointed out like Michelle and you're that's what you do. You professionally and artistically are storytellers. What's the difference? Is there a difference?
Yeah, I think so. I'd say in some of the work I've been doing on analyzing narrative, I've been sort of defining stories as meaningful connections across time. And I guess I've sort of been defining meaningful connections as the kind of connections that our conscious minds create that add a new order of meaning to events that may have no meaning inherently on their own. So my sort of thesis has been that humanity's narrative worldview emerged to help us better survive and thrive in the world, and that experiencing the world narratively had sort of this unintended side effect of giving our lives meaning. The difference, I think, between how that works in the stories of our lives as we experience them and the fictional stories that we tell is that, in real life, the meaningful connections that make up the stories of our lives happen sort of organically. We don't normally know what's going to be meaningful in advance. We tend only to sort of identify the meaningful moments of our lives in retrospect. Whereas narrative artists, I think, kind of intuitively understand what components a story needs to include to make the artwork a meaningful sequence of events. And I've sort of been referring to that process as a narrative syntax. So the decision of what to include, what to leave out, the best way of presenting that material so it can be most easily understood by the audience. And since, sort of generally speaking, artists create their sort of fictional stories out of whole cloth, in each moment of the story, they have the foreknowledge of what is to come, which lets them sort of craft each scene so that it can be meaningfully connected to one that came before or one that comes after, to weave sort of a story that will inevitably be meaningful to the audience only in retrospect, I guess.
Yeah. So there really has to be an audience in some
Yes.
ways. If you're an artist, it kind of requires an audience, or does it? Or to me, that sometimes gets in the way of being creative when you're always thinking about the audience that who you're, presenting to. What do you think, Michelle, about this idea? You're you're
Well,
you're a creative artist. You produce theater,
mhm.
musician.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this idea of meaning and creating meaning, the narrative artist creating meaning, and then the audience, tell me if I'm getting this right, Emmett, the audience accessing that meaning only after it's been created by the artist who has this narrative in mind.
Oh.
And
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, I think there's also there are also different edges to this because as far as meaning making goes personally, individually, in my own personal story, I think I've known that I've had, going along through life, I've had these certain narratives that I've told myself about who I am and what I'm doing here and, what's meaningful in life. And then things happen to disrupt all of that. And I find myself, um, first of all, without any of that meaning that I had to hold on to, because I believe that this meaning that we create for ourselves it gives us like things to hold on to in life, big ideas and small things, just to get through the day, to go and take a shower. And when giant things happen and your life explodes, that explodes all the meaning that you had made up until that point. All those neural pathways are gone. Like, say if you lose somebody who's really important to you, they're all gone. And so I look at it two ways, like personally, as a person, as a human, how do I make new neural pathways, and which ones do I want to make? And then as an artist, what is the story that I want to tell through that meaning that I'm making? So it's so I don't know. I have I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I also too, it's interesting. So the artist is a person who creates stories, who creates stories within themselves, tells a story. Let's say we're talking about a playwright, somebody that's creating a play or uh, something traditional. Um, they put the story out there. They really work on, and I'd like to hear more from you, Emmett, about, I think you said narrative syntax. Um, so they put it together, they show it to an audience, and then the audience creates their own meaning. So they're
Yeah,
actively creating their own meaning of the story that you've worked on. That and then
I,
along the way, as you're saying, what creates the story, Michelle, sometimes is an unexpected event comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Your life meant one thing, suddenly there's a loss, a tragedy, a windfall, something disrupts that. But that's just for the story, I would think, that eventually gets told.
yeah, I think that's true that, the artist has what the story that they make means to them, and then each audience member has how, the meaning that they take from it. And, no two of those people ever really have the exact same experience, but in a way, artists are sort of trying to like reverse engineer the process of the way that we find meaning in the world. Try to craft the narrative in such a way that it can be meaningfully understood by an audience. And yeah, I mean, death certainly is something that I think, obviously, it's meaningful in part because of how profoundly that can feel, the loss that can be felt. But I also think it comes with such finality and can seem
And it's
so.
not, sorry to interrupt, but not just how the loss is felt, but how it chemically changes your brain pathways. No, your
Mhm,
neuronal
mhm.
pathways are changed.
That makes sense. And it, I don't know, sometimes it seems so inherently senseless and arbitrary. I feel like that's something in particular that humans need to bring meaning to, which is sometimes why a lot of artists use that as inspiration for other work, because that's some of the best ways for us to process it.
Well, yes, and doing a lot of work as a grief activist now, I see that there's so much pressure on people in our culture to not have these feelings, to not express deep, dark, bad feelings like grief, because number one, they're not productive, and number two, they feel bad. But the more that we do that, the more that it stays unexpressed. And
Oh, I think he just froze up a bit.
I'm still here. Yeah, she's frozen for the moment.
Yeah, yeah. That's too bad. Yeah, that was a good thought.
Yeah.
We'll have to get back to that. I don't want to start the conversation with you and then
No, no, for sure.
well.
Well, yeah, I've got time. We'll
Yeah,
wait for her to catch up to us.
yeah.
A little hiccup.
Um, yeah. Also, by the way, your mom joined our narrative Mindworks.
Yeah, she sent me a message saying that she did. That's cool.
Yeah, I wanted her to see what you were doing, and I also wanted to find out what she was doing. Yeah, yeah. So part of what I really like about this process, this narrative mind works, is that I get to meet people and talk to them about their work. Yeah,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I
and
think
I'm at the age
both
where
of
I'm
my
not
folks
nervous.
would
I'm
be
sorry.
interested in what you're, I think both my folks would be interested in what you're doing here, even
Yeah.
beyond just my involvement.
Yeah, what's your father do?
He's essentially retired now, but he was most recently was working as a in fund recovery for in the healthcare field, but he has a lot of ideas about how he thinks healthcare ought to work, been trying to develop a product for many years that he's never really quite gotten able to sort of sell, as a pathway to streamlining the process that doctors, as how they work with patients and keep them informed and be proactive about the things they need to do for their own health. I think that's more important to him than the fund recovery aspects, which is how he sort of made his money. But he certainly has a lot of thoughts about that whole thing.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. Like I'm involved in this narrative medicine. It's supposed to help doctors be more empathic with patients, which takes time, if you get
Hmm.
interested in people. But the business model really doesn't allow for true empathy.
Hmm.
You, it's just you're looking at the bottom line and everything to your practice. I'm looking for a message from Michelle. I'm not sure what happened. Let me see if she's. I'm gonna
Yeah, go
s-
ahead.
I'll send her a message. Hang on. Let me see. Um, Yeah, let's give her a couple minutes, and if not, we'll just begin again. We'll start over again. So, you were mentioning the LARP. So you have one coming up this weekend.
Yeah,
So,
so I feel like we're a bit under staffed this weekend, so I'll probably be pretty busy. Just sort of stepping in for other folks and running my own stuff. And this stretch, the February, March, April, we tend to have a game in each of those months, and the sort of 3 to 4 week turnaround between games is not as long as it seems like it is. So, for players, but also for the storytellers. So, luckily, I don't think. I mean, after this weekend, we won't have a game till July, which will be a nice breather for everyone, and then give the story staff a little more time to sort of prep what story comes next, and everyone else just a little more recovery time before they go back into the world of it.
yeah, I'm wondering. I guess it was one of the questions I had last week. How does your community communicate with each other and prepare for a LARP? Like, what do you do to have to like
Um,
this? Like it can't. Yeah, like they create their own story within this framework.
yeah, I think
Like, how
I
do you
mean,
get
like
them started?
we have Facebook pages and stuff, but I think the Discord is the place where we live the most. The LARP itself has an official Discord server, which includes in character and out of character channels. So you could either text role play as your character, or in a moderated forum, or just talk out of character. And but also like each of the individual groups sort of make their own Discord uh, servers for whatever like tiny aspect of game they're involved with, which means that I'm in like 18 or 19 different Discord servers related to the LARP. Most of which I don't follow super closely, but yeah, it's kind of this web of groups.
Okay, if we can go
Hi,
back to
Michelle.
Michelle, I don't know if you even know where you left off. That's
Oh,
okay.
I don't
You're,
know either.
yeah, you were talking about the neural pathways get changed by
Yeah.
by life events. Life events change the chemistry. You feel differently.
Mhm. Well, not just feel differently, but your brain is trying to, your brain makes these shortcuts for people or things, events in your life that you live with. And then when they're gone, your brain doesn't know what to do with them. So it's not just a feeling. I just want to get that across.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Um, um, so and maybe it has something to do with art making too at the same time. I know for me, my whole art trajectory has changed since my life got turned upside down through so much loss. And I know that's happened to others. About using it as fodder for art, I think I think another way to look at that is that as an artist, I am privileged to have uh, tools or access to expression in in order to express some of this, like unholy kind of energy that had descent that keeps descending, and we all receive energy like that, and how do we express it? So maybe part of my calling in this world is as an artist to find ways to not only express my personal grief, and by grief I mean grief writ large, not just people losing people, but losing anything: identity, home, pets, jobs, youth. um, and if I can do that, if I can find a way to heal the individual, it also helps to heal the collective. And so maybe that is also be considered the audience. So, but it's a difficult path to traverse, because who wants to have to go through all that growth? Nobody. And
Right. Yeah.
and then, as an audience, and if you haven't done that, if you haven't had the privilege of experiencing that, all that loss and pain, do you want to also immerse yourself in it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're right. And telling a story about loss can help us process it. But in theory, yeah, the reason we create art is so that an audience can experience it. So in a way, if we can, if it's something that they can identify with, it's something that they can meaningfully connect with, then maybe it can help others too. And I think you're right. Like I'm a person who, for better or worse, is really good at compartmentalizing things and of avoiding processing things, even the things that I really need to. And when I am in therapy, when I do have a therapist or I'm in therapy, what I often say for myself, that the importance for me is that it forces me for that hour a week or whatever to go to places that I wouldn't go on my own. And I think telling stories about loss, where you're digging into those parts of myself that I try not to engage with a lot of the time, that can have a similar value.
Yeah, it really strikes me that the both of you are well, you both have an audience. They're very different in nature. I'm going to just say, like, for example, just distinguish between LARP and traditional theaters, like the kind that Michelle was creating. So you're both in service in some way to an audience. Um, but the audience is significantly different in the LARP. They're creating that they're creating the narrative that's meaningful to them. In Michelle, and again, this is just my opinion, so please correct me,
Mm.
both of you. You're creating on stage a memoir of loss, and there's I mentioned last night in our narrative medicine meeting, Melanie Brooks presented. She talked about her memoir of her father, dying of AIDS and the secret. What she said was really interesting. She said that there is a bias against memoirs. Um, and in the literary field, not in the public necessarily, but in the literary field, it takes a lot. It's a lot harder to push a narrative because of the idea that, or to push a narrative of, say, grief, a memoir, because of the idea that it's therapeutic. Although, and then I said, that's interesting because we don't have a problem with tortured artists in pain, uh, like Malcolm Lowry, who wrote Under the Volcano when he was in the midst of, killing himself with alcoholism. Um, I don't know what individually your thoughts are about that, about the different audiences, the different ways you service them, if you even think in that term. Uh,
Well, for me, the way I think about my audience now is so different than the way I used to think about it. I feel that I've been given this gift, and I want to be able to find ways to share it and enlarge my audience, which is an audience of people who see the value in looking inward and exposing maybe lies that we've been telling ourselves, i.e. stories, narratives that we've been telling ourselves. Like, for instance, I grew up in a dysfunctional alcoholic family system, and of course we had so many things, stories that I told that were created, that I helped co-create in order to survive. And now these things don't work for me anymore. So how do I untangle them? How do I untangle those stories? And so I can get to the real meat of what's really important and who I am. So part of my work is about doing that work on myself and helping others, as I mentioned, and also guiding us to be able to feel safe and have a brave space to tell our own stories. And what I love to do is not just use words. And I know there's many ways to spin a narrative, but using somatic work is really important to me, using the body and using the voice beyond words. So I think they all coalesce somehow, and that's the beauty of it all, because I don't know the answers. I mean, there's so much room for mystery that I have to leave out there.
Yeah, that makes me think of like there was a stand-up special by, I think it was Hannah Gadsby, called Nanette, and there was something that she said that was I'm probably paraphrasing, but it was essentially, we are the part of the story we focus on. And I was jumping off something you were saying earlier, Michelle. Like, we have these narratives about the meaningful moments in our lives that we think define us, and we have the things that we've done that were like, this is emblematic of the kind of person I believe myself to be. And then we also have the things that we've done that we're sort of a little more ashamed of, that, we think of that as an outlier. This is not who I'm aspiring to be. But we did both things, right? And and it is a story, really. You're determining the context of what those things are, saying, this is me, this isn't. You could just as easily say that this is you.
Right.
And it's an interesting process, sorting all that out, I guess.
It is. And that makes me think of, this is, I think this is true. I mean, this makes me think of The Voice. And in different cultures, I learned American English, and we place my timbre in a certain place in my vocal range. But you go to different countries, and they place the timbre in different other ranges. Some are higher, some are lower. So why not, as you said? Why? Well, I'm this person, but I could just as well be more of this person. So does it all come down to choice and how aware we are of the choices that we have?
Yeah, that's right. Variety, yeah, being aware of the variety seems to be a key factor in being able to adopt to another timbre, or another way of speaking. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
we're not really stuck in one way of communicating.
I think choice comes into it a ton actually, because, in a way, one of the things that our conscious minds enables us to do by creating connections is to connect the past to the present, or understand time at all. And uh, and kind of, pre-conscious beings, may have innate, like programmed in ways that they react to stimuli in the world, but we can actually sort of, because of the meaningful connections between the past and the present that we've made, that enables us, sort of what enables us to make choice. That, the humanity's freedom of choice, I think, stems from our ability to, see what has come before and use that to inform our things going forward. If that makes sense.
Yes, it
Yeah,
does. And we do have to be aware though that we have a choice. Like we can look back at the past and say, "Oh, that was a choice I made," rather than there are some brains that think, "Well, I'm being buffeted about the tempest of life and I didn't have a choice." It's so interesting. It's so fascinating to wonder about that.
I 100% agree.
yeah. I mean, it seems that the artist has it's a way of gaining control over something that you don't have control in your own life. That's what when I was a darkroom photographer, um, it was the one space I felt where I had control over how I produce something,
Mm.
and that it just provided an outlet. The other thing you guys have made me think about too is again the difference in the audiences. If you're experiencing a live event,
Mm.
you're kind of there from the beginning to the end. And then meaning comes from that. The audience creates their own meaning, or they co-construct meaning as a group. It's really different than film. I think that there are many, many films that I really love in part. They're not great films, but I love individual scenes, and I watch them over and over again the way a child would want to have the same nursery rhyme told over and over again. And it's because I'm bringing a particular meaning out of a particular scene, and it's just I can do that definitely more easily with a film. I can just record the film, watch it, stream it, and just go right back to the scenes that I love and discard the rest of it.
Mhm.
So it's another. So this whole discussion has made me thinking about not only creating the story but the audience participation in that story.
Well, yeah, and in theater, film, you're right, you can do that. You have the luxury of stopping it, starting it, and watching it over and over again. In theater, the audience, after a while, that we all start to breathe together and our heartbeats sync up. So there's this, we can feel the emotions that the actors are feeling if they're good, and so there's this collective embodiment in being part of a community when you go see a show that's so special. It's special in a different way from film.
Yeah, no, 100%. Um, yeah, what we were talking about a few minutes ago too was making me think of, something like, if you think about back to times like Shakespeare and his histories, everyone would have known those stories. So the
Mhm.
purpose of them wasn't to tell them what happened. It was really to, like, give a context, to help them understand them, to help them find meaning in the events that they lived through, or the historical events that they've heard about. And I think that that's a real thing with art as well. It's like help them learn about these characters and the world they live in, and how does that apply kind of to our world and our lives, and what can we learn about ourselves from being
Yeah,
exposed to this stuff.
or wanting to hear just the words again over and over again. Yeah, it's not simply about how it turned out, you know. I mean, that's the problem I have with like purely, dialogue driven stories where, you know what the ending's going to be, but the way it's told isn't that interesting. Um, but yeah, we why go to Shakespeare when you know how it's going to end? It has to be the content in there that is satisfying, and not necessarily the story, but how it's told.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. And you talk again about, if we talk about death and loss, if you really experience another narrative, be a movie or a play or whatever it may be, and you've seen it before, and you happen to know that a particular character is going to die at a particular point, like every one of their scenes the second time is sort of pregnant with a meaning that you weren't aware of the
Mm.
first time. And so there are still things to glean, coming back to work you already know. I feel like it also, I forget if we talked last week, but how there's some understanding that maybe, narrative may have some roots in sort of ritual. And the interesting thing about ritual is, like, even if you know what's going to happen, you still have to sort of enact it for it to have meaning. So like the ritual of a marriage, say, or the things that the words you have to say, or just because you know how it's going to go, and just because maybe you've already rehearsed it, doesn't take away the importance of the fact that you kind of have to do the thing. Same with like a play, right? Or you have to do it for it to exist, for it to have sort of that meaning to anyone.
It's
Yeah,
true.
there's no play without a community. There's no play without an audience.
Yeah.
Uh, and you just reminded me of the ritual that we used to have going to Catholic school during Lent. Every Friday afternoon, we'd be marched down to the church and do the 12 stations of the cross. Did you ever, you're shaking your head, so you must have done that.
Yes.
Yes,
And
to
it's
all that.
really powerful, because we did it as a school. All the kids in this grammar school, grades 1 through 8, went to church. The nuns were there, the priests, and they moved around, in our church, 6 stations on one side, six on the other. It was just really a powerful community experience. And including some of the individual stations had meanings. So the audience is so important in creating the experience.
Mm.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's going to be. I'm going to discuss it in sort of some of the later posts I've been writing on this stuff. But uh, the interesting thing, I think it was Richard Schechner, a guy who did a lot of work in what he called environmental theater in the like 60s and 70s, sort of the forerunner to what we might call immersive theater today. And he's a big proponent of this idea that, like, art as we know it, and theatrical performance, was a lot maybe rooted in ritual, and said some interesting things about how, you know, ritual is participatory inherently, and and it's transformative in part based on that and based on belief. So like, if rituals in Catholicism, say, you know meaningfully impact, if you believe in that religion and then you engage in the ritual, then it has a really strong transformative effect on you potentially. Whereas if you don't believe the religion and you happen to witness it, you go to church with a friend, it is that the ritual, you feel you're no longer really a participant, and you are more of uh, it's more of a performance. And I think Richard Schechner was saying that it's, in his mind, the idea of the audience as a detached observer of art may have emerged when uh, rituals, like when people stopped being as engaged and, maybe became more secular, moved away from uh, uh, you know uh, felt more detached. It's interesting, like,
Right.
and we sort of try to recapture some of that, like, participatory nature, uh in LARP or role play, or where maybe in a play, you know the storytellers and the art and the actors are trying to help the audience identify with the characters as much as possible and understand why they're making the decisions they make, and then in LARPs and role playing and those sorts of things, we try to craft a story around the audience who are being those characters, and there's a similar end goal, but it is a little different angle on it.
And just to comment on that a little bit, I've noticed that, to me, it seems that more and more the future of theater seems to be blurring the line between artist and audience. I mean, the theater that I really I'm drawn to, there's participation in ways that I didn't expect, or the audience is part of the program, which I used to do way back when in my little theater. I used to do that with family theater. I thought that was really important to introduce young people from the community and their caregivers to theater at an early age and make it interactive and fun. So I mean, I saw this amazing show at the Wilmot. It was a Pulitzer Prize winner a couple of years ago, called Fairview, and it's a 3-act play. And Act 1 and Act 2 are the actors on stage, but Act 3, the actors turn on the house lights and they ask the audience to switch places with them on stage. And it is all about, it's about surveillance and the white gaze and what does it mean to be on stage and the lights in your eyes and who can see and who can't see. It's really an amazing piece of theater. So amazing. So it's really exciting to me to see all of this cross interdomain stuff happening.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that, like I said, most of my work in my career, I've now been sort of characterizing as like participatory art in one form or another. And one version of that is, when the audience literally gets to be a character within the diegetic world of the story. But it's not just that. If you talk about show like Sleep No More in New York, which I think it may be ending this year finally after a long, great run. But generally speaking, you're still a voyeur in that. You just have this freedom to sort of move throughout the space and decide, kind of create a bit of your own narrative syntax by like deciding what you see when, because that thing that's sort of mediated by storytellers in a more linear thing like a play or a movie, you have more access to. So I think the way I've been defining participatory art is something where the audience can make choices that impact the way they experience the work, whether that means they're a character inside of it or it just means any of these other things. And I think I think that idea of switching places with the actors and getting another context on the performance and the experience of the actors and the characters up on stage is an example of that. Maybe the audience isn't the characters, but they're getting a whole new context on what it means.
Yes. And to that point, some of the work that I'm doing, well, right now I'm doing it with college students, so they're a captive audience, but taking people who don't identify as artists and giving them the tools to not only tell mine their stories of depth, these stories inside that we all have. I believe we all have these amazing stories that need to be told, and transforming them into theater where they perform for an audience in order to express these difficult emotions and things that happen to them. And because I believe that I love this really short piece of literature that I share with the students called "Be an Artist or Die" by Rex Beater. And and this goes along with my health humanities work and maybe narrative medicine as well, Tony, that there's a capacity for art in all of us. And I think it goes back to what you're saying, Emmett, about, way back when the humans and the early humans, and how they needed to express, and they created these rituals, and which eventually turned into theater. So I think it taps into that, and I think it's so important that we all be aware that we can find ways to express ourselves and to witness each other and to be witnessed.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a there's a dancer named Anna Halprin who was also, I think, in the sort of the 60s, exploring some of the ideas and saying how, I think she said something like the role of the artist is someone who works to evoke the art within us all. And to me, in regards to what we're talking about specifically, I think that speaks to the idea that, like, just that process by which we build that story of our life by, curating these particular moments and deciding what they mean in the aggregate, that is a creative artistic act. So, like, we are all in a way born storytellers just by nature of being conscious. And I think, yeah, probably artists find a way to tap into that thing that we just do naturally and apply it to fiction stories, and try to make them sort of as meaningful to people, or as the stories we live through.
Yeah, it really strikes me that, I agree, Michelle, that inside of us are we're artists, or we have the ability to be an artist. And I think that this conversation is making me wonder about what intimidates people from that, taking that step. And the move from ritual to secular, um, while I think that really did serve a purpose, if you take a place like the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which is my favorite art building in the world, especially, it's the Temple of Diana when you walk into it. It's intimidating. It's not only, it's overwhelming, but it's intimidating. And so therefore, I think if you're viewing art there, and you think of yourself as an artist, you think, I'm not an artist. To be an artist, I have to put my artwork in this temple. Uh,
Mhm.
same with old movie theaters, or even and Broadway. They're like churches. The theaters, art museums are like the new churches that you enter, and it can be intimidating, and it can be it could deter people from being artists, versus LARP, which happens out in the open, or telling stories around a campfire, where you're more or less in a natural setting. So it really strikes me that maybe the more natural setting it is, the more unchurchly it is, would be less intimidating for people to really become that artist that they're capable of being. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, like a tabletop role-playing rule book in a lot of ways is like meant to give the story, the game master and the players the tools to tell stories, really. And the fact that you're sort of doing it at home, and it's sort of the only audience is yourselves. It's meant to show you that, hey, you don't have to be a great actor to tell a story. You don't have to be a great writer to tell a story. You have, no one in your home tabletop role-playing game is going to judge you for your acting chops. As long as you're there and you're committing to the reality of the story you're all co-creating together, uh and feeling what that character feels in as much as you can, acting as that character would. I think, yeah, it's creating a context for people to experience what otherwise only sort of professional actors and performers get to experience.
Yeah.
I just had a thought, Tony, about this memoir question that you asked, just to go back to that for a minute. So you say that there is kind of there's a bad taste in some people's mouths about memoir because it's considered therapeutic. Well, here's another, I don't know, this surprised me when I learned this. So um, a clinical psychologist I know came to see my um, um, semi-autobiographical theater show. And at first, I thought she really enjoyed it. And later on, after we were discussing it some more, she said she was, I don't know, disturbed or ambivalent because not because of the content, but because of the fact that, um, I was using my dead husband and our relationship, what happened, and I didn't get to ask his consent
Mm.
whether I could do that. And she went on to explain that she even has a problem with memoir, and she teaches that in her course on ethics. And I was like stunned. I thought, oh, wow, that's I never expected to hear that and hear. And then I thought, my second thought was, well, what would an artist do if they can't use, other people in their art? Can we make art without using other people and their stories and how we're connected and our relationships? Can we do that?
Yeah, and is there a difference between the characters who are deceased and the characters who are still living and didn't have consent? Uh, so it's a big issue right now in narrative. Who has the right to tell the story? Who owns the story?
Hmm.
Um, you're telling us you told a story about Stan. I imagine he gave full spiritual consent. Okay.
I know who did.
Yeah,
He was
yeah.
your artistic collaborator. Of course he would go along with this, but it's still
Oh, yes.
there's still that ethical question of do you get to include real people in your narrative when living or dead when but historians do that forever. Yeah, I've read a million books about Hitler and all the that's I'm interested in cults, how cults get started. I mean, nobody asked Hitler's consent whether they could write a book about him or perform a movie. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
But memoirs, because it's so personal, it's in this separate category from history, and so there's a bias. She was saying, Leslie Brooks, and I think this is a fascinating idea. There's a bias in publishing against memoirs for that very reason that your psychologist patron uh,
Well,
discussed.
well, for her, it's not necessarily bias. It's an ethical problem. An ethical problem.
yeah, that's interesting. I don't see, I would say that like, in some of the work I've been doing with this sort of storytelling philosophy, I've been calling narrative correlation, relating back to some philosophical theories about, you know, essentially that because of the nature of how consciousness seems to work, uh, we can't be aware of the world as it is. It's always seen through the prism of our conscious awareness. Everything new we experience is connected with something that came before, and by that way of thinking, there is there's no there isn't such a thing as a true story. There's no such a distinction between objective history and like a memoir. Everything is filtered through the experience of the artist and then the audience. And I think that we can be freed up to give more people leeway when we understand that you're not saying this is the truth. We're saying this is how I experienced it and what it meant to me in a way.
Right. Yeah, yeah, Michelle, if you had been in a plural marriage and you had a sister wife, that person may have told a very different story.
Wouldn't
Uh,
that be an interesting play?
that's, geez, need a producer. That,
But yeah, because by like even just the like act of determining, like, if even if anybody, even someone trying to write an objective history of an event, so that's to determine what to include and what not to include, and 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 the context in which to present it. So like I said, there is sort of a narrative act there. So I think uh yeah, I think it's important that artists be able to access things that matter most to them. And I wouldn't say that it's, I mean, yeah, you run up against it more, I guess, if you're literally telling a story where you're doing like a biopic or whatever, and you're literally including people who were alive, once alive, or still are. But in general, just taking inspiration from the people in your lives. I mean, yeah, I don't think we'd be much as artists if we couldn't do that.
Right. And there's taking inspiration, and then there's also co-opting, and where does one end and the other begin?
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. I think it's situational. Everything exists in the context, and right. And so if
Yeah,
I an art a piece about my memories and my meanings, but a clinical psychologist is doing it too. So is it wrong for them to do it and right for me to do it? I don't know. Who decides that?
yeah. I mean, I guess in a way, artists are more putting it on display, but I mean, psychologists are too, even if it's just an audience of one or whoever they happen to be, you know, treating or dealing with. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good
No, it's
question.
interesting. So interesting. Yeah.
One of the ideas of narrative medicine, they talk a lot about perspective taking. That's kind of the point of it, is to realize that the story you're hearing is the story that you're making out of it. The story that you're gleaning from someone else's story, and that we all have these different perspectives, including the storyteller, and not only the listener, the storyteller. And so we try to understand, what's my perspective? What fuels that? What are the filters, unconsciously or consciously, that I've applied over the years that make me go back to a story over and over again? Um, and so as well as we might want to know the same thing about the person telling the story as well. So
Mhm. Yeah. Is it a default behavior, default worldview, default perspective, or is it one that's more, I don't know, conscious, aware, next level? And there's that question of being aware again.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the way, yeah, a lot of people don't have this deeply formed beliefs that could come from, upbringing or religion if you're involved in that or whatever it may be, and don't spend a ton of time questioning those. That's just so fundamentally ingrained in your idea of what it is to what your life means. And then I think there's a sense of where when someone has lived their life a certain way for so long, it it's a natural inherent resistance, because to admit that that might have been wrong, or maybe wrong is too harsh a word, but like, it wasn't, it's hard to say that, people get defensive. They want to like stick with what they have believed for so long, whether it's good for them or not, just because to admit otherwise is to suggest that so much of your life you may have spent thinking in a way, you know what I mean? Like it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
it makes me think about the characters that are often the most interesting, uh, that are created, maybe not out of one's life, or those that suffer from um, lack of insight, lack of reflection, hubris. I mean, there's certain Shakespeare characters that suffer from that. That's what we're there to watch, a disaster in progress.
Yeah.
Someone is about to really kill themselves in some significant way, or because they lack insight.
Right.
Um,
And as the audience, we can see, because we're separated, we can see that they lack insight, even if they can't.
yeah,
Even if it was reversed, maybe we would be that character, but in
yeah,
that situation, we can see it. That's a great.
Yeah,
yeah. It's kind of a lesson that maybe to get through life, you need a certain amount of reflection, self-reflection. Of course, that has a heavy burden to it. To what degree do we mull over the past?
yeah, I think in my opinion, more people need to be more reflective, but you can certainly go overboard. You can certainly that's another thing in the Ravenous Brain, the book by Daniel Bohr, that was a big part of the inspiration for what became my sort of narrative correlationism philosophy. He talked about how uh, our consciousness's capacity for learning also makes it that humans are the species, as far as we know, that have the biggest capacity for getting things wrong. like that, everything that he thinks of the brain as a sort of a complicated biological information processing device, and he sort of says that he thinks that anything we consider to be mental illness could be recharacterized as a disorder of consciousness, or our brain being too efficient or not efficient enough at processing information the way it's meant to. So like somebody with who struggles with schizophrenia, where you have they're making connections in the world the same way that we are, the same way we're meant to, the same way we learn and grow and understand our lives. The problem is their brain is working on overdrive and finding connections, like paranoid connections between things that there is no root in, right? So their brain is doing exactly what it is meant to do, what it's evolved to do, but it's become a burden on them. The same way that, if you're someone who's had a history of, difficulty navigating, romantic relationships, think past ones that have ended badly, your brain can tell you, like, well, they're just going to end badly, like, look at what happened before, without you realizing that, theoretically each one of them is distinct from the others. The fact that one ended doesn't mean another one will, or in the same way. But a lot of times our brain is trying to help us, protect us, by saying, like, look at that bad thing that happened before, you don't want that to happen again. And when sometimes, and it lets you get this skewed perspective on life in a way. What's one of the things I talk about in the series too is just how much, I think Daniel Bohr said that in a way sometimes our consciousness may have overreached. Like, it evolved to handle early humans and keep them alive, in fight or flight, sort of there's a predator out there and we need to make a gut decision right now, and be totally convinced in this moment that the decision we're making is the right one without all of the facts, because if we waited for all the facts we might die. But now,
Yeah,
but then that's how we're
yeah.
but now that's how we're built, and our gut feeling that so many people go with is often self-sabotaging and not the right thing to do. And when those of us who live in enough of a homeostatic situation where we're not, in danger every moment of our lives, of getting on to the next moment, when we have the luxury of, having that insight and taking that time to analyze the thing, there is still that part of us, that sort of innate evolutionary part of us, that just wants to make a gut emotional decision in the moment without all the facts. Like, we're built that way in a way. So it's interesting that in whatever new context we find ourselves in the world such as it is today, in our lives such as they are, that I think a lot of the time consciousness is trying to navigate us through, is this a thing that I can just react to based on, subconsciously, based on things I've experienced before, or is this a novel enough situation that I need to evaluate it on its own merits? And I don't know.
Well, I also, yeah, I also think there's a lot there. I also think that there's, I like to tell myself, who's in charge of my thoughts. My mind is, my thoughts are not in charge of me. I'm in charge of my thoughts. And when I find myself thinking, going back to these old default habits that aren't helpful and bring up a lot of unpleasant feelings in my body, I try to connect back to, like what I said before, these maladaptive coping strategies that I grew up in. I think most of us have some of them. And part of that is being aware of that. And also part of it is also being aware of somatically how I really feel. Is it a reaction? Is it an anxiety reaction from like the tiger coming at me? Or is it, and if it is, can I be aware of that and befriend it and let it know that I don't need it anymore? So um, something more independent can occupy that space if I need it, and that I can choose my reaction in that moment. So I'm not making the same mistakes by picking the same bad relationship choices over and over again. And I'm not saying it's easy. It takes so much effort. It takes so much effort and so much help.
Yeah, I agree. I remember I struggled a lot, I think, with I'm a very analytical person, as I'm sure anyone who's listened to any like this will see. And I sometimes identifying my own emotions that I'm experiencing is one of the hardest things for me to do. Like I remember a time where I've been in with therapists and she would ask me like, how did that make you feel? And then I would sit there and I think I'd say something like, well, I probably felt like this. Like instead of, I just like analytically, it's like, well, that was a sad situation, so I was probably sad. But that's different than saying the question was, how did you feel? How did it make you feel? Not like, what do you think it made you feel?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Uh, yeah, I agree. It is difficult, uh, and I think sometimes it does tie back to what you were saying earlier, Michelle, about it's true, we do have choice and we do make choices, and even when we feel boxed in, even when we feel that like, oh, so and so did something and then I had to do XYZ in response, that's really not the case. Like we always pretty much always have it. This is like literally a gun to our head or something. We always do have a choice, and it is helpful, I think, to take stock of our own role in our lives, and yeah, because otherwise it can lead to sort of bitterness and a outward sort of blaming and a sort of yeah,
Right. And
it's interesting.
I don't want to be. And this reminds me also of the old acting adage. I can't remember who said it, but once you learn your lines, right? That's so hard, and you can't deviate from the lines. That's what the playwright or the writer wrote. But once you got them, you have tremendous freedom to soar. So you have the constraints of the lines, but once you have them, you could go anywhere with them. And it's so true. I mean, 10 million people, all three of us could get the same lines and we'd create three different characters. And, and then we could create three on top of that and keep soaring.
And probably every individual performance that even with you as a single performer means slightly different, like, which I guess is part of what a live part of the coolness of a live performance is, just knowing that, hey, you're getting this unique, the lines may be more or less the same throughout, on a given, but yeah, just the little subtle nuances of the performance, and make it a little different.
Yeah, this conversation also makes me think about both of you as performing kind of a shamanic role in life. And because something that you said a couple minutes ago, Michelle, about I don't think you quite put it this way, but this is how I heard it. You can redream something. Peter Noon wrote this fascinating book years ago called In Search of the Dream People. And he was looking for this tribe, I can't remember where, that had a ritual every morning. They would sit around, I guess, and they would recount their dreams. And if you were dreaming about being attacked by a tiger, then you're really told to go back and redream yourself, um, taking control of the situation, fighting the tiger successfully, not being a victim of the dream, um, but really actively pursuing your agency. And so in both of your areas, you kind of do that. I was wondering, you know, so I know like Emmett, I think you really directly addressed this in LARP, how people will take on the characters, that maybe they're working on something, and they're creating this narrative. And Michelle, like in your situation, you're redreaming the life that you had previously in some ways on stage. I mean, I'm using it metaphorically, but I mean, it's exercising maybe the same kind of shamanic thing. Rather than be a victim of my past, I am going to take control and stage it and relive it and go back to it and re-enter,
And
re-enter the dream
meaning out of it.
and make meaning out of
Hmm.
it. Yeah, a new meaning. Yeah,
Yeah, it becomes like a representation of my experience or a representation,
right.
of the artist experience. And I honestly, yeah, I think Richard Schechner again did a lot of talk about shamanism, and he was specifically looking at like immersive performers and saying, are they like the new shamans and immersive storytellers? And I think in a way that they could be, but honestly, I feel like it's one of my future articles on it. I feel like a tabletop role-playing game master or like a similar staff member at a LARP, I think are one of the closest modern corollaries in terms of like a shaman being someone who facilitates a transformation in the audience. In these cases, it's like, hey, we're facilitating you being a character in this story or whatever it may be, through the rules of the game and the sort of narrative framework that we create. But I think, yeah, in a way, you can definitely expand this shamanic uh, uh, comparison to all artists for sure. It's you are not all art is or has to be transformative, but a lot of it is, uh, and yeah, even non-interactive. Well, as we know, of course, plenty of most of the history of storytelling has not been participatory in the sense that you're a part of the story, but that doesn't mean that there haven't been such profoundly impactful work that can affect people and make them see the world in a different way and themselves in a different way and other people in a different way. And uh and sometimes art gives us that sort of aesthetic removal from the situation. I think to the point that Michelle was saying earlier, like something we can be blind to in our own lives, we can identify in somebody else. And if we can then take that back into ourselves and apply it to ourselves and realize that, it can be pretty impactful.